Here are the pieces to the women's Cressida front bodice. I'm going to show you how to put them together and hold them up and check for fit. So I have all these pieces laid out. You can see this is the front center. These are the front sides, and this is the top sweetheart. And I should say that this is for the bodice A option. So I have my pieces laid out. You can see there's a notch down here at the bottom pointing in towards the center. This straight edge is the bodice center. Then you're going to have notches along the princess seam, along the top sides. They'll get lined up with the sweethearts. And then there are notches down here on the bottom to line up with the waistbands. There are also notches on the side. The double notch on the side will line up with the back side pieces. So let's get started assembling one side of the bodice. All right, you're going to place your center on top of the side, match up the top and bottom corners. The notches will match up. And you're going to ease the two pieces together. Now they are opposite curves, so that means you're gently going to ease them together, pull them together slightly, and they will match up at the 1/2 inch seam allowance. Then you're going to stitch that 1/2 inch. Take your pinking shear and trim that seam to 1/4 inch. If you do not have a pinking shear, you can just clip with your regular scissors up to, but not through that line of stitching the whole way around the curve. Then we're going to press the seam open towards the center bodice. At this point, I like to hold up my bodice piece to my bust and make sure that the curve is good for my shape and that it looks like it's going to cover what I need it to cover. You can tweak it at this point if you're doing your first muslin, or if this is your final, you can make sure it's fitting well. So you are going to want to hold it up to your bust. Take a look at it from the side and make sure that your seam is right over your apex and that it is smooth. And also remember that this piece, it's supposed to be on the lower half of your breast, so it's not going to fully cover because you still have to add that top sweetheart piece. It's more like a demi cup height. So hold that up. If you need to take a larger seam allowance through the curve, you can do that right now. So just take a slightly larger seam allowance, shave some of that curve off, or if you need more curve, then you can cut a new piece and adjust. Since that is fitting me well, now we're going to add the top sweetheart. I highly recommend that you run a stay stitch across the top edge of your bodice and across the bottom edge of your sweetheart top. You also will probably want to run a stay stitch across the top. This keeps your pieces from stretching out of shape, especially while you're holding it up, trying to get a good fit. So if you want to go ahead, stay stitch those pieces. You really want to make sure that your machine did not gather either of your pieces, or else they will not ease in properly. All right, now we're going to attach the top. Again, there's a notch here along this straight edge pointing in towards the center. There's also a notch at the bottom edge that is going to line up with the top of the bodice on the side. So we're going to flip that upside down so they are right sides together. And let's start pinning at the corner. Let's pin the other corner. And again, we're going to ease the top into the bodice there. And your pieces should match up at that seam allowance. Your notches should also match. There we go, fits perfectly. So you'll notice that my sweetheart piece is starting to curve. That's okay. We just want to have a smooth line at that 1/2 inch seam allowance. So we are going to stitch that together now. Again, we're going to pinking shear that top seam, or clip up to if you don't have a pinking shear. And now we're going to press that seam up towards the top. You can go ahead and top stitch that seam if you would like, or you can also add trim as I show how to do in the tutorial. But you can see that we're starting to get a nice 3-dimensional shape here that should cover your bust. At this point, hold it up to your breast again and make sure you don't have any extreme puckering at the top. So here's our completely pieced together bodice. I'm going to hold that up to myself, and you're going to make sure that it cups nicely. It is going to pull out a little bit up top here, but remember you're going to have straps attached. You'll have the side pulling it down, and this option will have the laces pulling it together in the front. So you can gently pull on it and kind of get an idea of how it's going to lay. And again, make sure that it's down far enough. This bodice was not designed to be a high full coverage. It's supposed to be lower on your bust. So that looks pretty good to me. I'm going to go ahead and repeat on the other side and get my other lining pieces ready to go. So here are all 4 of my pieced together bodices. I decided to make this floral print my lining, and then this multi fabric one is going to be my main bodice, and I went ahead and added ribbon trim to those seams. You will use your pattern piece to get your strap marking, and you will find that on the top sweetheart piece. I notched mine slightly while I was cutting mine out, so I'm just going to place clips there so you can see where those are. And I went ahead and stitched my straps per the tutorial. You are going to place them right sides together. You want to place the inside edge of your strap right on that marking. And you can see it's going to be, my seam is right here in the middle of my trim. It's about 1 inch away. The inside of that strap should be about 1 inch away from that seam. And then you want to repeat that on the other side. And I'm going to baste those in place. If this is your muslin, you can baste them, hold it up to yourself. See if you like where that's sitting and pulling at your bodice. You can adjust it, it's just a recommendation. So I'm going to take this over to my machine and baste those in place. This is my lacing loop piece. I'm going to cut it into equal sections that are 1 3/4 inches long. For bodice A, I like using an odd number of loops, and I usually choose 5. That again is just a recommendation. If you want more, that's fine. If you want less, that's also good. going to take my expandable gauge and evenly space my 5 loops onto my bodice here. You're going to want to leave at least a 1/2 inch at the top and the bottom, because you will need that for your seam allowance. So you can either mark or place pins where you want everything. And you're going to take your loop and you're going to fold it right sides together. I like my seam to be towards the bottom edge. And then you're going to turn it so that the fold is pointing in towards that princess seam, and the raw edge will line up with the raw edge of your pieced together bodice. And then you're going to pin those all in place. All right, now we're going to take this over to your machine and you're going to stitch each one of these down. I do not recommend basting in one long line because those basting stitches are long and your loops could fall out. I just like to stitch one, lift my needle, stitch the next, and go down the line. So stitch those all, and then you're going to want to compare it to your other side of your bodice. Make sure your marks are in the same spot and attach the other loops to the other side. Now we're going to assemble our bodices here. We're going to take our lining and right sides together. We're going to match it up with our main bodice. The straps and the loops, if you added them, they're going to be sandwiched in between the two main pieces. So match up your notches and your corners at the sweetheart. And match up your notches and your corners of your bodice down that front center. Okay, we're going to sew across the top sweetheart curve to the point, down the front center with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. We're going to clip that inside corner and trim the seams with our pinking shear. Turn your bodice right side out. You can use a point former to push out that top center corner. Now you're going to take it over to your iron and give everything a good press. You can also baste across this bottom part to make sure your pieces stay matched up together, and then repeat on the other side. Now it's time to attach our bodice to our front waistband. If you notice on your waistband piece, you have a notch, and then there is also a very small marking towards the fold line that is going to tell you where that corner of your bodice should be placed. So take one side of your bodice, flip it right sides together, and you are going to pin to the corner of your waistbands. And to that marking. You can match up your notches. And pin the rest together. If you're noticing that your bodice doesn't quite match up, it could be a slight seam allowance issue. You should not have more than a 3/4 of an inch gap between your two bodice pieces. I mean, you can if you want, you're just going to have a more open bodice. All right, we're going to repeat that on the other side. Pin to the corner, and I did not baste my pieces together. I probably should have. I am having to pull a little bit. It's probably just because like I said, my seam allowance is slightly off and my pieces may have stretched or gathered slightly from sewing them all together. Okay, but it all fits in there pretty well. I like the space that's between there. It's less than 1/2 inch, which is what we are shooting for. Now that we have that all pinned together, we are going to take our lining piece, flip it over so it's right sides together with the lining. You're going to want to match up the notches and the points and the corners. So your bodice will be sandwiched in between both of your linings. Now everything is pinned together. We're going to sew this all together with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Make sure you stop at that point, get a nice crisp point with your needle. We're going to make a small V cut right at that center point. You want to cut up to, but not through the line of stitching. And then we can trim that seam allowance down to reduce the bulk. You can open it up. If you want to understitch your seam here, you can. So understitch it to the lining side, and then we're going to press it all together. I'll be adding the waist sashes to this bodice. They're optional, but if you would like to add them, go ahead and make your sashes per the tutorial. Once they are ready to go, you're going to place your sash right sides together to your seam of your waistband and your bodice. And then you're going to pin that in place. Since I did add trim and my trim is coming up a little bit higher, I'm going to add it to the top of that so it's all even. You just want to keep in mind your bottom seam allowance here. You need at least a 1/2 inch there. So once that is pinned on, you can go ahead and baste that in place. Repeat it on the other side. And then your front bodice is completed, and we will move on to back bodice construction. Next, we're going to sew the back pieces together. I have all of my lining and main pieces laid out. The wider ones will be in the center. The shorter ones will be on the sides. You can note that the side pieces will have straight edges that get sewn to the seams. The outer edges are going to be a little more angled, and all the pieces should have notches that will match up to make putting together the seams a lot easier. You want to place your center back bodices together, right sides, match up the center notch and the 2 notches on the sides, and we're going to pin it across the top edge. All right, we're going to stitch that top edge with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Trim the top seam with your pinking shear. Open up your centerpiece, and we are going to press the seam towards the lining side of the bodice. And you can understitch this seam if you would like. Then we're going to press the back center pieces so they're wrong sides together, and lay your piece out with your lining right sides up. Grab a ruler and a marking pen or chalk. You're going to start measuring from the top edge, or from the very top edge, you're going to start measuring 3/4 of an inch down. So measure and mark your first casing. Then you're going to continue marking your casing the entire way down until you get to the bottom. At the bottom, you need to leave at least a 1/2 inch seam allowance so you can sew your bodice to your skirt. So however many casings you need will be determined by your size. Some of the sizes will have more casings than others. So I'm just going to go down and mark a line every 3/4 of an inch. Okay, I'm going to stop my last casing line there. I have about 1 inch left at the bottom. This is size green on the women's, and I'm not going to put another casing in here. So I'm going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 casings, which means I will need to cut 8 strips of elastic. We need to sew down each one of these casing lines that we just drew, and those will form our elastic casings. If you are comfortable using a shearing technique, you can do that as well. You take your elastic and start threading through the first casing. When you get to the end, stick a pin so it doesn't slip out, and continue pulling your elastic through the other side. Hold it in place by clipping another pin, and then space your gathers out evenly, making sure your elastic is not twisted in the casing at all. And we're going to continue inserting elastics down to that final casing you created. Now the elastic length is something that you can play around with. If you create your muslin and after doing a fit check, you notice that your waist seems a little loose, what you can do is you can shorten the bottom 2 or 3 elastic casings, and that will pull in the waist. Also, if you are someone who is noticing some gaping under your armpits, if you don't want to mess with the front bodice pieces, you can shorten the top casing pieces a bit. So this is really a good reason why we need that muslin fit check before you cut into your good final fabric. That way you can determine if you need to make any of these little tweaks just for a really nice fit. Here's our back centerpiece with all of our elastic. I want you to take the time to make sure that you caught all that elastic in each casing. Trust me, you don't want it to pop out after we sew on the sides because it's going to be much harder to fix. So make sure you caught each one. Give a good tug to make sure nothing snaps out. And you should have a beautiful faux sheared look. So we're going to set that aside and we're going to construct our side pieces now. Main pieces, again, the straighter side with the single notch towards the top, that is going to be your inside pieces. Those are getting attached to the back centerpiece. The side pieces here, they're going to have an angled side and they're going to have a double notch, which mine is more like a wide trapezoid shape. And grab your linings. You're going to take your lining piece, match up your right sides and your notches. and then you're going to pin along the top edge. Going to go ahead and repeat that on the other side. Right sides together, matching up the notches. Top edge gets pinned. Okay, and just like with the center back piece, we're going to stitch them together at the top with a 1/2 inch. Then we're going to trim the seam allowance, press the seam towards the lining side, and you can understitch that if you like. You're going to open up your side pieces. Make sure your double notch, that's your side seam, they're on their proper side here. You're going to take your back center bodice, and we are going to take this side right here. It has the single notch, and you're going to match it to the single notch up here. So your lining, the main side will be against the main side of your side piece, and the lining will be with the lining side. Okay, so you're going to lay this edge against this straight edge, right sides together. And you want to place your top corner right underneath that seam. There's the seam. We're going to just slide that right underneath. Then we're going to take the top edge of our line, actually it's the bottom corner of our lining, and we're going to pull that over, and your back center is going to get sandwiched in between those side pieces. You're going to pin that in place. Now, if this is your muslin or your very first version, your practice one, you do not need to worry about enclosing the seams like this. You can just sew them right sides together if you're just doing a quick fit. But this will give you a nice, beautiful, clean finish on the inside. So here you can see and double check. This is the lining of the side. This is the lining of the center. They go together. And then the back center main and the side main are together. Now we're going to stitch this with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, trim the seam. This is also your second chance to make sure that you catch that elastic in that seam. Okay? Now we're going to open it up, and we can press our side pieces wrong sides together. And if you wish to, you can top stitch this seam. Now we're going to do the exact same thing on the other side of the bodice. So take your back center piece, flip it face down so that your side and your main are right sides together. Place the top corner of your center right underneath that seam. Fold the side lining over so your center panel becomes sandwiched in between the lining pieces. In between the side pieces, sorry. And we're going to pin down that other side. All right, we're going to stitch, trim the seam, press it together, and I'm going to top stitch that seam. And here is our piece together back bodice. I did give this section just a shot of steam to help the elastic shrink back up. It did stretch out a little as I was pulling it through the casings. But we have a beautiful enclosed back bodice now. Now it's time to sew the front bodice to the back bodice. If you would like the quick version, you're just going to place your front bodice and back bodice right sides together, matching up those side seam notches. You're going to pin and you're going to stitch down the sides. You can finish it with your serger or a zigzag stitch, and then you'll want to finish off your serger threads. There is a way to enclose the bodice. It's similar to how we enclosed the back here. What you're going to do, you're going to take your side panel and you're going to open it. Now you're not going to have a ton of working space, and the smaller the size you have, the harder it is going to be to do this, but it's definitely doable and it'll give you a beautiful finish on the inside. You're going to take your bodice, and you're going to flip it so the right sides of your main pieces are together. Once again, you're going to take the top corner of your bodice here, and you are going to place that right underneath the seam. Okay? The right sides are against the right sides. Can you see that that's right underneath the seam? Okay, then you are going to take your lining side and you are going to pull that over, and you're going to sandwich the front bodice in between the back bodice sides. Okay, like I said, because it's stitched together down here, you don't have a ton of working room, but it is doable. So if it helps, you can pin it at the top here. Give yourself a couple pins down the side. If you added the sash, you want to make sure that the sash is pointing in towards the center of the bodice. Okay, so after you kind of get that worked, pull the lining side down over the lining of the bodice there, and we are going to pin that in place. Okay, there it is. Oops, my lining slipped out a little bit. Let's pull that over. Okay, you can scrunch up the rest of this bodice however you need to, but all we need to do is make sure that we can get a good 1/2 inch here. Okay, take your seam allowance, stitch that together with a 1/2 inch. Now we are going to secure our straps. Turn your back bodice right side up and pull your strap down so that it's not twisted. Take note where your seam is that attaches to your back center panel. You want your strap to go right alongside that seam. That's a really good starting spot for where your strap placement would be. So place your strap about 1/2 inch to 1 inch down from the top edge of your bodice there. I'm shorter, I'm 5'2", so I know that my straps need to be a tad shorter. And place a pin. And repeat that on the other side. You will want to baste your straps in place and try your bodice on. If you decide you like the strap placement, you can go ahead and take a zigzag stitch to the bottom edge of your strap here and stitch your strap down really well along that top edge. If you would like to adjust your strap position based on the type of bra you want to wear, you might be able to cover your strap a little bit more. You can definitely tweak that to however you like it. Here is what my strap looks like from the inside and from the outside. Now, once you figure out your strap placement, you definitely can enclose your strap into your side bodice, your back bodice piece here. It is a little bit more tricky to construct the back with the whole front flopping around while you're working. So that is why I decided to just finish it off and stitch it at the very end. But now that that is all done, we're going to go ahead and add our skirt piece.